Um, it is April 1st, 2021. I'm Nicola Spurling, and this is the Coquitlam Heritage Oral History Project.
Hey, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. First, can you say what year you were born, and where, and what your childhood home was like?
Sure. I was born October 8th, 1990 in White Rock, British Columbia, and my childhood home was in Burnaby. I don't remember the first home. I was there for just a couple of years, and then my family moved to a house just above Deer Lake in Burnaby South. And my childhood was great. I grew up doing a lot of local trips, canoeing, hiking, all sorts of different outdoor activities. So it was a lot of fun. I took up cross-country skiing. I had good friends. And I mean, I started to sort of fall into depression in high school, but the childhood years were great.
Do you have siblings?
No, I was an only child.
Okay, nice.
I am an only child.
Do you speak any other languages?
I went to French immersion, so I definitely still have some French in my repertoire, but it's rusty, so I need to be immersed in it for a little while before it comes back again.
Did you start from grade 6 or from grade 1?
I was supposed to start in kindergarten, but there was a mix-up. So I started in grade 1, and then I went up until grade 7, and then in high school I did sort of an honors program in grade 8 and 9. So I did grade 10 honors, grade 11 honors, and then I switched schools, and I couldn't get into French again. So that was sort of the end of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Like too many kids?
I think it was that we'd switched the schools too late in the year, and it wasn't possible to register for French. So I took up drafting, and that's kind of led me down the art/construction route.
Nice. And so you mentioned that you did like skiing. Do you do it like professionally, or is it more like a?
I did cross-country skiing at sort of a competitive provincial level. I think for a little while, I think I was 8th in British Columbia as far as my age category for skiing. So not, extremely competitive, but also not recreational either.
Yeah, nice. How long did you do that for?
I started skiing when I was, I think, 7, and then I still ski, but I stopped racing when I was 19, I think.
And so we want to talk about first, I guess your elementary school experience. You said it was like pretty, like a good time.
Yeah, I mean, as a trans person, I was struggling with sort of that aspect of things in elementary school, but most of elementary school was sort of pre-puberty, and it was, I guess, a little easier to deal with back then, and there's less cares that you have when you're in elementary school, so that was all good. And then, as I moved into high school, things started to go downhill a little bit. I just stopped caring because I was depressed, and I needed to. It took me a while to figure all of that out, but.
Who helped you? Was there people who helped you with that journey?
Figuring out the depression and how to deal with it. There were people that tried to help. I think my mom was one of the main people that recognized that it was an issue when I was growing up, but there's only so much you can do when the person who's dealing with it doesn't acknowledge it, and I wasn't really acknowledging it back then. So nothing really happened until 2010 when I went on a backpacking trip around Europe. And that's when the depression sort of alleviated a little bit, and that's when I started trying to figure out how to actually make it go away.
Do you mind talking about what you learned to help with the depression?
Sure, it was kind of a long process. So, like I said, in 2010, I went backpacking around Europe for 2 months. That helped to get rid of my depression, and that was the first sort of big trip that I'd ever done. The only one I could remember outside of Canada, really. So that was a really exciting experience. And then that helped to get rid of my depression for probably at least a few months after I got back. But then it came back again. And I thought, well, I guess traveling is the way to get rid of depression. So I went on a 5-month road trip around North America. And again, it got rid of my depression for a while, but it came back. And it wasn't until 2013 when I started volunteering with Vancouver Pride that I realized that the depression was linked to the fact that I was trans, at least in a lot of ways. So that was when I discovered that I was trans and kind of had a word to describe these feelings I'd had my whole life. And I took quite a while to come out, but as soon as I got on hormones, that was essentially when the depression almost completely went away. And I still deal with it, but it's much, much less than it used to be.
Are you comfortable talking about your experience with your gender journey?
Sure.
In 2013, it was kind of like when you sort of made that connection that that you're trans.
Mhm.
Like, what was that like? What was like the first sort of couple of steps with that and being on?
Yeah, it was really just one step. Well, sort of. I was on Gambier Island at my grandfather's place, and I'm adopted, so I was sort of meeting my biological family, and I met my biological uncles, and they're a gay couple, and one of them was volunteering for Vancouver Pride. So they said, you should come and volunteer for us. And I really had no connection to the community at that point, but I said, sure. My uncles asked me to volunteer. Sure, I'll do it. And I showed up, and the first thing they asked me was, what are your pronouns? And I thought, okay, what does that mean? And they said, well, do you use he, him, his pronouns, or she, her, hers? Well, can't you tell just from looking at me? And then they started to explain, no, that's not really how it works. And then I met another trans person, and my idea of what it meant to be trans was informed by what was available online growing up, which was really very limited. It was just mostly pornographic, and that wasn't something that resonated with me. By all means, if that's what you're interested in doing for a living, then that's fine. But it wasn't something that I could connect with. So I didn't come to the conclusion that I was trans by seeing that. But when I saw this trans person at Pride, who's just what you would, I guess, consider a normal person, just someone going about their lives just like anyone else, I thought, oh, that's something I can relate to. And that was when I kind of clicked for me, and I went, okay, trans now describes all of these feelings that I've had since I was in grade 1, really, that I felt like a girl, and I couldn't describe it, and we didn't have any education around it, so there was nothing that would have made me clue into it sooner. So it really took until 2013 before I even understood what it meant to be trans and was able to connect that with my identity, and then start considering what I do about that. Because at that point, you can either suppress it and try to carry on with the life that you're living, or you can recognize that it's not a feeling that's going to go away, it's going to get worse, and you have to do something about it. And that was sort of the conclusion that I'd come to, but I had to figure out how to make it happen and how to tell people, and it's just a long process. So I just took every step slowly, and that meant that I didn't start hormones until 2015 and didn't socially transition until late 2016, early 2017. So it was definitely a process.
So, and what made you decide to become like an activist for you?
I didn't really decide, I don't think. I think I was forced into it, and then I just decided to roll with it. So when I ran for the BC Green Party in 2017, I was outed as trans in national media, and it started by a miscommunication with the Green Party and Global News, resulting in me my face appearing on television. And I had all these people texting me going, hey, I just saw you on TV, that's so cool. And I thought, why would I be on TV? So I looked this up and realized what had happened. And then I put out a Facebook post talking about the dangers of outing a trans person. And fortunately, I'd sort of expected this to happen in some way or another during a political campaign. People dig up dirt on you. So I decided to roll with it. I had something semi-prepared that I'd written so that I could come across as much more reasonable than I maybe felt in the moment of having just been outed. And I put that out, and it really resonated with people. That ended up getting even more media attention, spreading across the country. I started getting messages from England and from Australia. And at that point, I thought, well, I'm out publicly. I might as well become an activist. Because that was really the only thing that I think was holding me back, was the idea of wanting to be able to continue living just this normal life. But the moment you're out, you stop being able to get jobs very easily, and you stop being able to hide who you are from anyone, really. And I wouldn't have run for politics if it really bothered me all that much not being able to do that. But that was sort of the deciding moment of going, well, if I'm out, I might as well run with it.
And so, like, you eventually got into politics before, like, you were publicly out. So, like, what attracted you to, like, joining with the Green Party?
Yeah, it's funny because I wasn't out, but I was still involved in queer advocacy, and it always just came back to, oh, my uncles asked me to volunteer, so I did, and I basically kept that line up until, I guess, 2015, within the Vancouver Pride Society, I think I'd come out to maybe a few people, but I was at that point on the board of directors for Vancouver Pride, and still no one realized that I was trans. And I came out very shortly after that because I started on hormones. But it was, like I mentioned before, it was a slow process of basically trying to become comfortable with every step that I was making. And I would go, okay, I'm starting on hormones now. I need to adjust to this and make sure I'm comfortable with it. And then I can tell people that that's happening. And then adjust to that and be comfortable with it. And then maybe come out a little bit more. And so it was just kind of dipping my toe in here and there.
You mentioned like you got a lot of support from when you came out.
Mm-hmm.
How was it like last year's election? How was that experience?
At this point, I basically, it sounds strange, but I assume I'm going to get hate on a sort of regular basis, or at least semi-regular basis. So it's not really a matter of, is this going to happen? It's when is it going to happen? And it generally coincides with big things that I'm trying to accomplish, and people want to try to pull me back. The trans folks want to pull me back. So it could be when I'm running for election, or when I made it onto J.K. Rowling's radar, or there's all sorts of things that have happened basically in the last, I guess, less than 5 years that have resulted in really sort of wild experiences, both in a good and bad way, whether that's being harassed by transphobes and doxxed, or outed in a political campaign, or being threatened to be sued by the world's richest author, or, you know, all of these really strange things. But they also tend to result in really positive experiences as well, because they provide me the exposure that I need to reach the people that can provide me with really positive opportunities. So the job that I'm working in right now is a result of all of that. Because like I mentioned before, I never really was able to get a job after transitioning, at least not through normal methods. I would use my social media presence that I had gained through being outed to basically say, okay, I don't have work. Does anyone know of anything? Rather than sending out resumes, because once people find out I'm trans, I don't get callbacks, I don't get job offers. So the person who I'm working for now found me through my social justice advocacy work, brought me into the company, and now I get to do that for work. And I just designed the trans lesbian flag. I dropped it off for the Vancouver Pride Society's queer time capsule project yesterday. And it's just sort of the snowball effect of all these really neat things that are going on at the same time that I receive all of this hate on a periodic basis too.
You have a lot of small, you're like a small business owner. Right?
Yeah, I definitely would call myself a small business owner, but my my commitment to my businesses sort of goes up and down depending on everything else that's happening in my life. So if I'm running an election, the businesses get put on the side, and if I'm working for a company like the Flag Shop, which I am right now, then they get put on the side. And then if I don't have a job because no one's hiring me because I'm trans, I put it on social media, then I'm running my businesses. And just between all of that, it allows me to at least maintain some income that pays the bills.
Grew up in Burnaby. What did you move to Coquitlam?
I moved to Coquitlam. Well, actually, I moved to Tsawwassen before I moved to Coquitlam. So my family in grade, it would have been just starting grade 10, so 2015, I think. We moved to Tsawwassen. I came over about a month before my parents did, and stayed with my dad's cousins so that I could attend school for the first month of the semester, or of the school year. And then we were in that house for up until 2013, or I was in that house until 2013. And then I decided I wanted to buy an apartment, but I was making $25,000 a year. So it basically just became a matter of, how close can I get to my job in Vancouver and be able to buy a place on $25,000 a year? And I ended up at the cheapest apartment I could find in Coquitlam.
Nice. Now you're obviously really active in Coquitlam. As a candidate, talking to the citizens or the people of Coquitlam, what have you learned from them?
Every election is different. Everyone has different issues, and it depends on what level you're running at. So in provincial elections, you hear a lot about, there's crossover. So housing affordability is a crossover between municipal and provincial elections always. But there's definitely much more local issues. My area of Coquitlam is Austin Heights, sort of these older apartments that we're now seeing high rises go up next to, and there's gentrification and there's changes in pricing and seniors being forced out of the market and things like that that are much more location specific that don't seem to reach it to the provincial level. So you get to have much more of those sort of heart-to-heart conversations with people about the things that really affect their lives at that level. But as far as making sort of more broad societal changes and talking about the kinds of issues at that level, those are the conversations that tend to happen when you're running for provincial politics. But one of the things that I've focused on, because especially when I'm running provincially, I know that there's almost no chance that I'm going to win the election because I'm running for the Green Party in an area that always swings NDP or Liberal, and lately always NDP. So my goal was really just get the message out there. Don't worry so much about being liked by everyone, but talk about the things that are important to you and the things that are important to the party, and then just grow the support from there. It's not sort of, I'm going to run in this election to win. I'm going to run in this election to try to grow support for the party, and that's what I focused on. But even municipally, when there is a chance of winning, I find that I always want to be true to myself. I don't want to say things to try to get votes from people. So when I'm having conversations with individuals, if we have a disagreement, I'm not going to say, oh, I absolutely agree with what you say, and then completely forget about it if I get elected. I'm going to say, no, I don't actually agree with you, and this is why. We're going to have a conversation about it. And no one's going to agree 100% of the time, but I think it's important for politicians to not go after votes, but to stand up for their principles and what they believe in. So that's sort of the philosophy that I bring into every time I run in an election and all of the conversations that I have with people.
So I guess now moving to here the Tri-City Pride.
Mm-hmm.
How did that get started, and how's that been growing?
Well, Tri-Cities Pride was started partly because of my municipal campaign involvement and also my push for a rainbow crosswalk in Coquitlam. When I was pushing for a rainbow crosswalk in Coquitlam, it was really difficult to convince people that this was something that we should move forward with, at least in the way that I thought it should be done. When I had brought the rainbow crosswalk forward, I talked about the Gilbert Baker flag and what it represents. And the Gilbert Baker flag is either a 6 or 8 color flag, and every color has a meaning. The staff at the city had proposed a plan to have it as a 7-color rainbow. And then the mayor of Coquitlam had argued that that should actually be the case, because then instead of making it about queer people, it could be just about diversity in general. And I thought, well, it's kind of strange that you want to try to separate this symbol from queer folks, but he was sort of this mindset that it's a slippery slope, and if you do something for this group now, you're going to have to make a Nazi crosswalk later. And so we had all of these back and forths around this, but when it came to the 7 colors, I sort of hit a wall. And every time I asked councillors and every time I asked staff, they were saying, no, this is what we're moving forward with. And so I then received a call from CKNW saying, would you like to give commentary on how this whole project is coming together? And I said, sure, I'll give you some commentary. And one of the quotes that I said was, if they are to approve this 7-color crosswalk, it would be a slap in the face to the queer community. And the the headline that was printed is, Coquitlam's approval of a rainbow crosswalk is a slap in the face to the queer community. And I think almost every councillor stopped talking to me as soon as that article came out. They didn't bother to read the full quote. And that was kind of what sparked a lot of the issues that I had with certain people on council. And it was part of the reason that I wanted to run, because I saw that this seemed kind of like a dysfunctional operation at City Council. And I thought, well, I'd love to add my voice and try to fix this. So I decided to run. And then that also played into the forming of Tri-Cities Pride, which happened sort of between those two things. So I formed the Tri-Cities Pride Society. We put together a board of directors, and then it became a struggle of finding people that had time to commit on a regular basis to actually make things happen. And that's a struggle that I think every society deals with and that we still deal with, but we definitely have a much better team now. We've since then been able to put on various different educational events, fun events, and that's something that we were really wanting to do, but it hasn't grown to the point that I would like it to be at. But also now I'm far too busy to grow it to that point myself as well. So right now I'm still in the position of the president of Tri-Cities Pride, but I've told the folks on Pride that we need to find people for the board that can put in more time, and that I would like to be able to step back from that position and give it to someone else who can really take on that role and run with it, because this organization isn't me. It's just something I started, and I want to see it grow with or without me. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. But I think it's really surprising to me that we don't have a lot of that queer history here, or at least the history. The things that we're talking about are so recent. The installation of a rainbow crosswalk and the creation of a pride society in the Tri-Cities has all happened in the last few years. Even the first drag show in the Tri-Cities only happened a few years ago with the Coquitlam Queens. So that's, I think it's really neat that you're doing this project of letting people know everything that's happening, but also I think I would love to be able to hear, because I know that this isn't the queer history in Coquitlam. This is what I know of the queer history and what's been publicized about queer history. But every society has so much history that is kind of underground, and especially in cities that are, I guess, further away from Vancouver, where it's not seen to be as safe to be queer, people are hiding the things that are happening. They're holding events underground, and I would love to learn more about the actual queer history of Coquitlam that I don't know about.
Nowadays, do you see like a growing queer community in Coquitlam?
I think I'm seeing a more vocal community. I don't know whether it's growing or not at least at a faster rate than the societal average, because obviously more people are feeling comfortable coming out of the closet. But definitely, we've seen the Rainbow Crosswalk in Port Moody and in Coquitlam. We've seen this become much more of a conversation. With me having run as a trans candidate, that's been a conversation that people have had, whether positive or negative. And then I was on the selection committee for the arts, the queer art project at Lee Square in Port Coquitlam as well. And it's just really neat to be able to be involved in all of these different sort of history-making things throughout the Tri-Cities. But I don't know if it is a case of the community growing and feeling safer, or if it's just a case of us being more vocal with the hope that that's going to happen. Because definitely my goal with wanting to have a rainbow crosswalk in Coquitlam was making sure that people feel safe and supported by their city. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to, because if you walk across, as I have done, walked across a rainbow crosswalk into City Hall just to get misgendered by staff, then you have to wonder if that rainbow crosswalk outside of City Hall is making the difference that it's symbolizing.
Yeah. And just what year was that put in?
That would have been 2017. I want to say 2017. Seems like that's a while ago now, but yeah.
You do have like these Spurling Speaks where you go to school.
Mm-hmm.
Can you mind talking a bit about those experiences? Like what you're talking about with your children? Some of them are high school students.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't spoken in elementary schools, at least yet. I've talked to teachers about it. I was talking to people about having an assembly at an elementary school right before COVID hit. But with COVID, I don't do my speaking in schools anymore. So what I did instead was I put together a YouTube video that was basically the same presentation that I would have given in a school, and about just trans issues in general. And then I put that out and I said, if you're a teacher and you want to show this in your class, go for it. And I've had teachers doing that instead. And students will either, they might follow me on social media, or more likely they're going to ask their teacher to ask me a question, which I can then respond to, and the teacher can respond back. But when COVID's not happening, it's a lot of fun. I can go into high schools and I can do multiple classes in a day, just talking about things that affect me, and it allows them to then ask me questions. And because I'm not really afraid to talk about anything, they can ask me whatever they want. They don't have to worry about offending me, and then I can answer them, and I can let them know if what they've asked is, maybe widely viewed as offensive, but I'm not going to take offense to it. I'm not going to respond in that way. I just want to educate them so that they don't have maybe a negative reaction with someone in the future, and also so that they're not necessarily saying offensive things in the future because they have an understanding of what it means to be trans. And then I also will speak at post-secondary schools to typically medical students about the gaps in the healthcare system that trans people experience. Things like trans broken arm syndrome, which is when you would go into a hospital or a doctor's office and talk about an issue. The extreme example being, I have a broken arm, and they would just say, oh, well, the problem's that you're trans. And they'll blame basically everything on you being trans or the medication that you're taking because you're trans rather than actually trying to solve the issue that you've come in to address. And I know it's not just trans people that face that. People that are obese, for instance, will go in and every problem is blamed on their weight when a lot of them are not necessarily going to be that problem. And again, it could be a case. A friend of mine had a broken arm recently and had her weight blamed for it. And that was from a car accident. It has nothing to do with that. So those are the kinds of things that I'll educate people around in post-secondary schools. And then one of the other businesses that I run, which is sort of linked, I've been wanting to try to bring them together, but just finding it difficult to create a name that encompasses both speaking that I do in school, but also the education work that I do within organizations, because I'll consult with companies and nonprofits and things like this to come up with gender inclusive policies and to work through documents to remove gendered language. And that's something that I'm going to be doing with the Flag Shop that I've been working for as well. They're a very inclusive organization. That was part of why they reached out to me in the first place, but they want to be the best that they can be, and that's one of the projects that we have to do for them as well.
You mentioned like with growing up in school, there wasn't really any education about queer trans issues or like the experience in general. Have you found like there's more education now for the students these days?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fact that I have, and even speaking in schools, I think speaks to that, because when I was in high school, we had one gay person come and speak to us. That was how I learned what it meant to be gay. But there's definitely no talk about trans people and definitely not enough talk about gay people either. So I think that we need to sort of have these conversations more, and I think it is happening. And I think SOGI education is one of the big ways that that's happening as well. It's encouraging people to include inclusive education into their curriculums and also providing them with the resources that they need to know what to teach. Because if I had had SOGI education when I was in elementary school, just before I was about to go through puberty, I would have immediately been able to recognize, oh, that's how I've been feeling. Trans now makes sense. And then I could have talked to my parents about it, knowing that that was something that is legitimate that people experience, without having that fear that they would have an issue with it or that this was somehow wrong. And then that would have allowed me to speak with healthcare professionals about whether or not transitioning was right. And it's still a different time. So that's not to say that I would necessarily be in a better place now, but it certainly would have potentially removed a lot of the struggles that I dealt with growing up.
If you know, like, what are some like common questions that students generally have?
Well, my YouTube video has sort of a list of questions that I've answered. A lot of it has to do with things that you wouldn't experience if you're not a trans person. So what does it feel like to use the washroom, not like the physical experience of it, but trying to use a women's washroom when people are telling you that you're not allowed to use women's washrooms, or they want to know how I recognized that I was trans. And I never know if a question is coming from a place of a trans person who's not out yet, or someone who is just curious, or even someone who's trying to sort of ask you a prodding question that is intended to catch you off guard or trip you up, because people will ask questions for a variety of different reasons, but I try to take everything at face value and answer it honestly. And even if they're trying to trip me up, you can't be tripped up if you're just talking about your life. So I don't even mind that. But I think it really depends. I always get asked different questions. One of the most memorable ones for me was at an HR committee meeting, actually, rather than in a school. And it was someone who said, we have an issue because someone transitioned in our office and they're very tall and they can see over the stalls in the washrooms. And they said, should we allow them to use the women's washroom? I said, that's not an issue of whether or not they should use the women's washroom. That's an issue of your stalls being too short. So I said, just put in taller stalls. And they said, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. And it's one of those things that you think is really obvious. But as long as you answer the question, assume that they're coming from a place of just wanting to understand, not trying to be difficult. I think that you can create a lot of change that way.
Is there a sort of like advice that you would give like younger LGBTQ youth?
I really struggle to give advice to youth because I never want to give people the wrong advice, and sometimes people need completely opposite advice. Sometimes people need to be told that it's okay to stay in the closet because it's safer. And if you don't feel safe coming out, stay in the closet. If you can if you're physically capable of doing that, and if you don't need medical treatment or whatever it is, be a good self-advocate. It's really difficult to do, but if you're not going to speak up on behalf of yourself, people aren't going to know what you need. I think it really just comes down to trying to do everything that you can to be your authentic self, to be safe in doing that, and to advocate for yourself to receive the kinds of care that you need. Because if you're not doing that, then I think the symptoms that you might be experiencing as a trans person, of feeling depression and feeling like you can't make it to whatever age you need to make it to start living your life, that's really difficult for someone to be dealing with. So if you need to just transition as quickly as possible, then go for that. But if you need to take your time, also do that. And that was me. I needed to take my time. That's how I'm so confident in who I am, is because every single step that I made sure I was 100% confident with it before moving on to the next step. But not everyone's capable of doing that, because it took me years before I could live my authentic life. And then it wasn't until I was 26 that I really felt my life had begun. And I've been on this nonstop path. If you look at my life going up to 26, it was pretty stagnant. And then when you look at my life from that point to now, it's this snowball effect where my life's basically taken off, and I've seen tons of success, and all these really interesting things have happened. So I don't think there's any one piece of advice. It's do what feels best for you.
Well, you mentioned you were adopted. Was for your how do you say this? Your adopting parents?
My adoptive parents. I call them my parents, and then I call my biological parents my biological parents.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you know about your parents?
Sorry. The people who raised me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I know. I guess whatever they tell me. I'm sure they keep things from me, but they have a pretty exciting life, from the stories that I've heard growing up, because my mom's a librarian, my dad's a historian, so they keep very good records of everything. And my dad's a big storyteller, so he's done tons of traveling through South America and in Mexico and the US, and done a ton of family research. And there's just so many incredible stories of traveling around the Galapagos, or climbing in the Andes, or waking up on a beach with guns pointed at their face because there's a revolution happening, or an iguana sitting on them, or I can't even keep track of the stories because my memory is nowhere near as good as my parents, but they've definitely had exciting lives.
So your dad, what's your dad's name?
My dad's name is Jeffrey.
Is Spurling?
Spurling, yeah. Both of my parents are. So Jeffrey and Joanna Spurling.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
You know your mom's maiden name?
Sargison.
In the future, like some ancestor of yours is looking.
Yeah. It's Scandinavian. I guess the son of Sarg is a Viking name, Norse, something along those lines. My dad, if he sees this, he's going to give me some flack if I got things wrong.
And do you know anything about the history of your biological side?
A little bit. I've reconnected with my biological family, like I mentioned before, with meeting my biological uncles. But my birth mom I met when I was, I want to say 18. it was just after maybe 17, right after high school, and we we've stayed in touch since then. I worked for my biological uncle and grandfather, and with my biological grandmother for a few years, doing construction work, and then because of issues with the lawyer's office and documents disappearing and names being redacted and all of this information, my biological father wasn't able to find me in the same way that my biological mother was, and the two of them weren't communicating with each other. So I didn't hear from him my whole life, whereas my birth mom I was receiving pictures and letters from growing up. So I had a much closer feeling of connection with my birth mom, and that's why I connected with her first. And then my birth dad, I sort of found out later that he was really interested in meeting with me, and I discovered all of these issues that had caused him to not be able to get in touch previously. And once I had that information and I decided, okay, I have some time to introduce myself to another huge family. Because that's the thing, is every time you meet a new family member, like a biological mother or biological father, they bring their entire extended family with them. So you think it's hard to keep up with your regular family. Now you start adding two other big families into the mix, and it becomes quite challenging. So I finally felt ready to meet with him, and that was a few years ago. So interestingly, I didn't meet him until after I transitioned. So he's only known me as this person, but he'd obviously received pictures when I was growing up. So he's stayed in contact, and I'm super lucky because as far as family goes, I haven't had a single unsupportive family member across any of those three extended families. And I haven't met everyone. I'm sure that experience wouldn't continue if I started to meet everyone, but I think that's pretty incredible.
Is there any like half siblings that?
Oh, absolutely. So my biological father has 3 children with 2 different marriages, and my biological mom has 3 children from 1 marriage.
Would you mind saying your biological parents' names?
Oh, sure. John and Teresa.
Come back to like your parents that raised you. So what sort of holidays or celebrations did you take part in?
Well, my family, we weren't a religious family, but we have religious backgrounds, I suppose. So those kinds of traditions still remain. Like we celebrate Christmas, none of the religious aspects of Christmas, but just we put up a tree, we exchange gifts, we get together with family, the kind of cozy aspects that you grow up with and you don't want to get rid of just because you don't celebrate the religion that's associated with it. And then Thanksgiving, we would get together with family, and Easter, and we obviously birthdays. So I would say that the typical celebrations that, at least that, the white Christian families in North America seem to celebrate.
Yeah. Do you have any like celebrations that you do now that you didn't celebrate when you were growing up?
No, I don't think so. I think there may be slightly different ways that we celebrate, but everything stayed pretty consistent. It's one of those things where I think the times of the year when we celebrate are the times when we're at least for me, I'm trying to get that feeling of nostalgia, and so I don't want things to change. But obviously, family changes. When my grandmother died, it really changed the dynamics of our Christmases, for instance, because we didn't have that central figure bringing all of these families together. Now all of those families have their own separate gatherings. So things like that change, and that's sad, but it's just a part of life.
Did you like eat dinners with your family, or family dinners like with a
just on a regular basis? Yeah, my parents definitely tried to promote that a lot. We would have kind of my memory from a lot of the time between elementary school and when I finished post-secondary and moved out of my parents' place is kind of vague because I was feeling so depressed at the time. But from what I remember, it was very common for us to have to sit down at the table and eat a healthy meal, which was good, to get forced to do that. And we would occasionally have the TV dinner times, but a lot of it would be sort of a traditional set time, like a Friday we get pizza and we'll watch a movie while we're eating pizza, something like that. So there's definitely a lot of family interactions and focus on getting to know each other. And I think there's certain things that my parents are, I would say, conservative in the non-political sense. Um, Definitely very much progressive in the political sense, but um, we don't have the kind of friend relationship, or at least growing up, it wasn't quite like that. It was a much more parent-child dynamic. But it's been interesting as I've grown up because the time that we'd spent being forced to be together had allowed us to learn a lot about each other, which now that we don't live together, there is more of that friend dynamic, and we get to hang out and we talk every day, and we sort of get to carry on those conversations, and we know so much more about each other because we took that time growing up to interact as a family.
Do you have like meals that are like resonant with you?
Yeah, I'm awful at cooking meals for myself because if I have free time, I'm usually filling it with some sort of project that interests me, and sometimes it's cooking. But a lot of the time, if it's just a general meal prep, I don't do it. So I'll either go out and buy a meal and spend too much money, or I cook something really easy. So my diet at home, especially when my mental health isn't in a great place, is not the best. So my parents will sometimes, if I go out for dinner at their place, give me something to take home and put in the freezer so I can have like a home cooked meal sometime. And there's things like quiche that I love, or there's there's a lot of dishes that I grew up eating that I don't eat anymore because I don't eat. I'm pescatarian now, and a lot of them contained meat that wasn't seafood. But there's still lots of different meals. My mom is a really good cook. I don't like everything that she makes, but she makes everything really well. Um, and so I love when she'll give me meals like that quiche or burritos, or my dad makes incredible pizzas and baked bread. So there's definitely staples that we still have around. Saturday morning scones, Sunday morning waffles are traditions. If I happen to find myself at their place for a prolonged period of time, maybe then I'll start to get back into some of those traditions.
Do you happen to have any like family heirlooms that have down to you?
Family heirlooms?
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many. There's and I don't know the history behind a lot of them because there's ones that my parents know the history of, and we have so many antique pieces of furniture and little knickknacks here and there. My dad, we make jokes that he's a hoarder. He's very organized, but he doesn't get rid of things. So in our old house when I was living in Burnaby, the entire basement was just piled floor to ceiling with archive boxes with like this tiny pathway to get around the outside of it. And now those boxes are in the crawl space in the shed, so the house is definitely not as cluttered. But I imagine there are absolutely tons of items in those boxes that he hasn't gone through since the 70s. Neither my parents have, and eventually they'll have to go through them. And I know my dad is going through old pictures and doing tons of family research in his off time now as he sort of approaches retirement. But there's some that really stand out for me, like when my grandmother or my nana passed, she had a mint container that would always be on her coffee table, and it was something I'd always associated with her growing up. And it wasn't until I think a year or two ago that I asked my parents about it, and they said, "Oh, we have that," and they gave it to me, and now I have it on my coffee table. So there's little things like that, and for other family members too. But that's sort of the probably the most meaningful item that I have aside from my stuffed animal from when I was born.
Was there like an event, like a world event that happened that like really affected you growing up?
I think every generation has its world event that affected them, and for me, it was probably 9/11. That was, I would say, the most impactful world event that I can remember. at least one that sort of happened all at once. And I would say COVID is going to be that for kids growing up today. It's going to be, so what happened in your childhood that sort of defined this thing, or what major event happened? It's going to be this, but it could be the Vietnam War, it could be World War II or First World War. But there's every generation has its big event, and what all I remember from that, because I was still fairly young at that point, I was in elementary school, was waking up in the morning. My parents told me what had happened. We sat down, watched the TV, went to school. At school, we sat through the whole day just listening to the radio, hearing everything that was happening. And then obviously the fallout from that we're still experiencing. I mean, you look at ISIS as sort of the most recent example, probably, of a major terrorist organization or a major world-changing thing that came out of this event from ages ago. And yeah, but there's been plenty of defining moments, I think, throughout my life. That's probably just the one that would have been defining for everyone, including me.
You're obviously still quite young.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is like, besides the obvious technology sort of advancements, what is like the big difference between like the world versus when you were a child versus now?
I think I don't know if I can pinpoint any particular thing. The world is very different. One of the things that I was recently noticing is how different television is today than it was back then. Because I think television, when I was growing up, was not about trying to be representative of society. It was about being feel good. So the nostalgia that I feel for a lot of the shows that I grew up watching, for instance, is something I still have. But when I go back and look at them now, it is very much fake. It's everything is glossed over. Everything looks perfect, and I love it. If I'm depressed and I want to feel good, and I go back and I watch one of those '90s sitcoms that I used to watch as a kid. But if you want real issues to be talked about, I think that's something happening much more now. I think people tried to gloss over societal issues in the past, and now we're really bringing them to light and talking about them. And I think it's important. That's a lot of the work that I do, is talking about trans issues, LGBTQ2 plus issues in general, environmental issues, housing affordability issues. Those are the kinds of things that I talk about. And I know people were talking about them back then as well, but I don't think that they were nearly as mainstream. And certainly as a kid, I wasn't thinking about it back then. So that's probably the biggest shift that I've noticed, is just in terms of people's openness to talk about real issues.
And how do you mind talking about your experience with COVID? How that affected like work and your life?
Oh, well, this past year has been absolutely ridiculous. Everything is affected by COVID. Not everything that happened in the last year that was ridiculous is related, but certainly it was sort of an overarching constant. My work was definitely affected by COVID. So at the beginning of last year, and I'm trying to remember this because I literally just wrote out my entire story of the last year 2 days ago. And it started essentially with a trip that I'd planned to go on to Japan with some friends, and then that was canceled a couple weeks before we were supposed to leave because of COVID. That was going to be my first trip in 9 years, I think, 8 years, something like that. So I was pretty excited for it, and I needed a break, and it didn't happen. So that kind of started off a very stressful year. And then I was in the process of buying an apartment when COVID hit. So I basically just had to rush to get that done as quickly as possible because the lawyers were shutting down offices, the banks were shutting down. No one knew how to deal with COVID. So everything was shutting down. I was trying to get everything finished because I had a date that I had to finish by. So I did that. And then I had just all sorts of difficulties, I guess, around not being able to see people, which everyone's experiencing, not being able to touch anyone, not being able to play sports. I couldn't play soccer or anything like that. But then I lost a lot of work. So my work started to go down and down and down throughout the year. And at around November, I was able to basically, this constitutes constructive dismissal, please send me an ROI. Because at that point, I was making far less working than I would have been making sitting at home on EI. And I wanted to be on EI, but I hadn't been laid off, so I couldn't do that. So it was a very stressful year from a financial perspective as well. And then I just went on a trip because I had to, and we could travel at that point in time. So I did 2 weeks of just driving around the Rockies and trying to figure my life out and what I wanted to do, because nothing seemed like it was working well. My mental health wasn't in a good place. I'd lost my job. My volunteer work was all shifting, and I basically just decided I need to make a complete change in my life. And as of January 1st, I started doing completely different work than I'd ever done in the past, or promoting completely different work. And then I got hired by this flag shop. So my life now is almost 100% different from where it was a year ago when COVID began.
Is there anything, is there anything further you want to talk about either your activism or your other work or anything like that?
I mean, I'm sure I'm always forgetting things, and also you just can't talk about your entire life or even the last 4 or 5 years in one sit-down session. So I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that I'm necessarily leaving out, but everything's constantly changing, and I always have things in the work. And some of the things that I'm really excited about at the moment are I designed the first ever trans lesbian flag. So that's a world's first, which is really cool. And then I worked with the flag shop to actually make it become a reality. So yesterday on Trans Day of Visibility was the first day that we were able to have a physical version of the flag I designed, and we were able to promote it and say that it's for sale now. And I said I don't want to make any profits off of this. I want any money that comes in from this that isn't going directly to paying the cost of creating it, I want to go to trans organizations that locally. And I also had wanted it to be open source, so that anyone from around the world could take this design and print it and create a flag if they want to. And then I signed the first one. I gave it to Vancouver Pride for their time capsule project. So that was it's really exciting being, I guess, part of something big like that's just really exciting. And looking back at all of the things that have happened, that in the moment, my focus is never on trying to create something historic or it's always just I've got a cause that I care about, and I put in the work to do something about it, and then something interesting happens because of it, and I never really know what to expect. So nothing. I just kind of roll with whatever presents itself. And one of the other things that's presented itself recently is the flag shop said, you can do your artwork for us. And art is something that I've always loved to do. Since I was a kid, I've been doing this very specific style of art, which I still do to this day, but I kind of experiment with how I present that style. So it shifts a lot, and my drawings look very different, but they all follow the same sorts of rules that they did when I was in elementary school. And that's been sort of this cool consistent throughout my life that I've been really excited to experiment with, but I've always just viewed as a sort of a fun hobby. And then last year I started doing a lot of work, and people started getting interested in it, and I realized maybe I can actually sell some work. So I've sold a few drawings now, and the flag shop wants to basically take my artwork and wrap their entire building with it. And that's just a really exciting project that I'm excited to see come together. And most of the art is now complete. It's just the process of digitizing it and fixing imperfections so that it can be printed on vinyl and then put on all of the windows and things like that. So yeah, I think I'm just excited, not just about all of the things that have happened, but all of the things that are still to happen.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's amazing.